Every story has a before. Before the hero becomes the hero. Before the name is given. Before the first journey begins. There is the before. The ordinary time. The time when the person who will become remarkable is still simply a person living in the world that made them, in the family that made them, in the particular circumstances that will eventually push them out of the ordinary and into the story. The before of Yamato Takeru was not peaceful. He was born the second son of the 12th emperor, Keiko Tenno, the great emperor who ruled from Yamato, from the heart of the islands, that had been born from the salt, dripping off a jeweled spear in the age before history. His name at birth was Wusunomi Koto, the small mortar prince, a plain name, a simple name, the name of a boy. His brother was Osunomi Koto, the large mortar prince. These are not grand names. They are the names of two boys, given before anyone knew what either of them would become. Wusu was strong, not strong in the ordinary way, not strong the way a farmer is strong, from years of lifting and carrying, not strong the way a soldier is strong, from years of training, strong in a way that was deeper than that, strong in a way that came from somewhere, that had nothing to do with training or effort, strong in the way that certain people are simply made strong, the way certain rivers run faster than other rivers, not because of anything they have done, but because of the shape of the land they run through. The first thing the Kojiki tells us about Wusu is something his father asked him to do. His brother Osu had been neglecting his duties. He was not appearing at meals. He was not presenting himself at the times and places required. Keiko Tenno asked Wusu to go to his brother and speak to him, to encourage him, to bring him back to his responsibilities. Wusu went. He was gone for some time. When Keiko Tenno asked a few days later whether Osu had been spoken to, the answer that came back was yes. He had been spoken to, but Osu did not appear. The emperor asked why, and the answer was that Wusu had found his brother and had grabbed him by the hand and twisted him until something broke, and then had taken what remained and wrapped it in a mat of reeds and thrown it away. This is the Kojiki. It does not soften. It says what happened, the way it always says what happened, without comment, without the careful distancing that later storytelling learned to use. When the truth was too direct, Wusu killed his brother, not in battle, not in war, in the ordinary space of a family, with his hands, because something in him that his father had not counted on was always present, always at the surface, always looking for a place to go. Keiko Tenno was afraid of his own son. This is also stated plainly. The emperor who ruled all of Yamato, who commanded armies, and received tribute, and whose word was law, in every province of the islands was afraid of this boy. Not the boy's strength exactly, or not only that, but the quality that the strength pointed to, the quality of something that does not fit in any container you put it in, the quality of something that will always exceed whatever space is given to it. So the emperor sent him away. He sent him west to the land of Kumaso in the southern island, where there were people who did not submit, people who had always been outside the authority of Yamato, people who needed to be dealt with. He sent his dangerous son toward the dangerous people. Two dangers pointed at each other. What he expected was perhaps that one danger would eliminate the other, that Wusu would go south and either defeat the Kumaso or be defeated by them, and either way, the problem of the boy would be resolved. This is not what happened. Wusu went to his aunt first. His aunt was Yamato Hime no Mikoto, the princess who served at Ise, the great shrine of the sun goddess, the shrine that had been built for Amaterasu in the age when the gods still walked among the things they had made. She was the sacred keeper, the one who maintained the relationship between the divine and the human, who held the thread of connection that had run from the age of the gods to the age of the emperors, and needed someone in each generation to hold it. Wusu came to her and wept. He did not try to hide it. He wept in front of his aunt, the way someone weeps when they are very young and have not yet learned that weeping in front of others is something to be ashamed of. He said to her, "Does my father want me to die? I have only just returned from the west, and already I am being sent east, without rest, without time, without anyone beside me." This is the other side of Wusu, the warrior who could not be contained, the boy who wept at his aunt's shrine. Both are true, both are him. The Kojiki holds both without trying to resolve them, the way it holds most things, understanding that the most interesting people are always more than one thing, always exceed any single description, always contain within them qualities that should not coexist, but do. Yamato Hime listened to her nephew. Then she gave him a robe and a bag. She said, "When things are most dangerous, open the bag. This is how help comes in the Kojiki, not the help of armies, not the help of gold or weapons, the help of a robe and a bag from a woman who serves the divine and knows things that warriors do not know." Wusu went south. He traveled to the land of Kumaso, the land in the far south, where the mountains come down to the sea, and the people who lived there had always lived outside the reach of Yamato's authority. The leaders of Kumaso were two brothers, their name Yamato Takeru, the valiant ones of Kumaso. They were celebrating. They were building a new hall, a great feasting hall, and they had gathered people from everywhere to celebrate and the celebration was going to last for days, and the brothers were at the center of it, eating and drinking, and feeling the full weight of their power and their position. Wusu looked at the celebration. He looked at the robe his aunt had given him. Then he put it on. He combed out his hair. He tucked flowers into it. He put on the robe of a young woman. He became, to all appearances, a young woman, and he walked into the celebration with the ease of someone who has decided that the situation requires the full flexibility of their nature. The brothers saw him, or rather they saw what they thought they saw, which was a beautiful young woman entering their celebration alone, and they invited her to sit between them. Wusu sat between them. He smiled when they smiled at him. He accepted the cup when they offered it. He watched the celebration the way a hunter watches, with attention to everything, with patience. When the celebration was at its deepest, when the drinking had gone on long enough that the brothers' attention was softer than it should have been, Wusu reached inside the robe. He took out a sword. He killed the elder brother first, then he turned to the younger. The younger brother, finding himself at the point of the sword, said something remarkable. He said, "Wait." He said, "I have something to say." Wusu waited. The younger brother said, "In all the West, in all the land I have known, I thought there was no one stronger than us. But you exist. Someone stronger exists. I will give you a name. From now, you should be called Yamato Takeru, the valiant one of Yamato." And Wusu, having heard the name, killed him. This is how the name was given, not by a parent, not by a ceremony, by a man who had just been defeated, in the last moments of his life, giving his conqueror the greatest gift he had left to give, the name of the strongest. Wusu no Mikoto became Yamato Takeru, and the story began. Part 2. The Western Campaign. Yamato Takeru did not return to his father immediately. He was in the south, in the land that had been outside Yamato's authority, and now that the leaders of Kumaso were dead, he moved through the land, the way water moves after a dam breaks, finding every place that had been blocked, and flowing through it. There were gods in the west who had not been brought into the order of things, gods of the mountains and the rivers and the sea crossings, old presences, things that had been in the land before the first emperor came down from the sky, before the land had any name other than what the things living in it called themselves. Yamato Takeru spoke to them. Some he persuaded, some he defeated, some simply withdrew before the force of him arrived, understanding, the way old things sometimes understand, that the time had changed, and what was coming could not be stopped. He went to Izumo. Izumo is the land of the great shrine, the land of Okuninushi, the land where the gods gather in October to decide who will be joined to whom. In Izumo there was a man called Izumo Takeru, not the god, a man, a strong man, a man who had made of his strength something like a religion, who believed in it the way some people believe, in anything that has not yet failed them. Yamato Takeru did not fight him directly. He made a sword, a fake sword, a sword with a blade of wood, finished carefully, wrapped carefully, placed in a scabbard, so that it looked like a sword, felt like a sword, seemed in every particular to be a sword. He went to Izumo Takeru and suggested they swim together in the river. They swam. When they came out, Yamato Takeru put on Izumo Takeru's sword, his real sword, and he suggested they exchange swords as a gesture of friendship. Izumo Takeru put on the wooden sword. Yamato Takeru drew his real sword. Izumo Takeru reached for his own and found wood. This is how the West was pacified, not always by force, sometimes by something more like water, which finds every weakness and uses it, which does not break what it encounters, but shapes itself around it until the encounter is over and the water is on the other side. He came home. He came to Keiko Tenno's palace in Yamato, and he reported what he had done. All the enemies subdued, all the gods brought into the order of things. The West, as far as it needed to go, now under the authority of the Emperor. Keiko Tenno listened. Then he said, "Go east. No rest. No recognition. No time in the palace. Just the next direction." The east was restless. The east had its own gods, its own strong people, its own resistance to the idea that anywhere should be subject to anywhere else. "Go east," said the Emperor. "Bring the east into the order." Yamato Takeru went to his aunt. He went to Yamato Hime at the shrine of Issei. He said the words he had said before. He said, "Does my father want me to die?" He said, "I have only just returned, and I am sent again, with no rest, no army, no one beside me." He wept. Yamato Hime listened. She had listened before. She would listen again. This is what she does. This keeper of the divine relationship, this woman who stands at the meeting place of the human and the sacred, who holds the thread. She gave him the sword from the tale of Yamatano Orochi, the sword that Susanoo had found in the body of the serpent and sent to his sister Amaterasu, and that had been kept at Issei in the innermost place since the age of the gods. She gave it to her nephew. She said, "Be careful. Do not be careless." She gave him the bag with the fire inside, the bag she had given him before, with its instruction: "When things are most dangerous, open the bag." Yamato Takeru took the sword. He took the bag. He went east. The east is different from the west. In the west, the land is old, in a particular way. The shrines of Izumo are among the oldest things in Japan. The mountains of Kyushu have been mountains for as long as mountains have been mountains. The West has its own settled heaviness, the weight of things that have been exactly where they are for a very long time and have accumulated that weight in their soil and their air. The East is different. The East has a different quality, newer, or at least newer in its relationship to the authority coming from Yamato, wilder in the sense of being, less shaped by that authority, less worn into the pattern that the pattern makers of Yamato had been making for generations. Yamato Takeru moved through the eastern provinces with the sword at his side. The sword was already famous. It had been in the tail of the serpent. It had been given to the sun goddess. It had been kept in the innermost place of the most sacred shrine in Japan. To carry it was to carry all of that. Every person who saw him and knew what he carried understood what they were looking at. Not just a sword, but the accumulated authority of everything that had led to this moment. Some submitted, some fled, some did not. In the province of Sagami, near the sea, a man who governed that land invited Yamato Takeru into a great field. He said there was something there, worth seeing. He said, "Come into the field, and I will show you." Yamato Takeru went into the field. The man set it on fire. This is the oldest trick. The field, the fire, the invitation, the understanding that even the strongest person can be caught in the middle of a fire with no way out if you plan it carefully enough and move quickly enough. The fire came from all sides. The grass was dry. The wind was moving. Yamato Takeru remembered the bag. He opened it. Inside was a fire striker, the stones that make fire, and he had the sword. He used the sword the way it had never been used before. He cut the grass around him, the dry grass that was burning. He cut it and cut it, clearing the ground around him, creating a space where the fire had nothing to feed on. Then he used the fire striker. He lit a fire of his own, a counter fire, a fire set against the fire, meeting it in the open, burning toward it rather than away from it. The two fires met, and the fire that had been set to kill him found its own fire coming toward it, and there was nothing left for either of them, and both went out. Yamato Takeru stood in the burnt field. He looked at the sword in his hand. He had used it to cut grass. The sword from the tail of the serpent, the sacred sword of the three treasures, had cut grass. And because of the grass it had cut, he was alive. He named the sword then. He called it Kusanagi no Tsurugi, the grass-cutting sword, the name it still has, the name by which the third of the three treasures is known today, kept in the dark of Atsuta Jingu, the great shrine of Nagoya, where it has been kept since Yamato Takeru's wife placed it there after his death. He killed the man who had set the fire. He killed the man's companions. The place where the fire had burned is called Yaidu now, a city on the coast of Shizuoka, a city named for the burning. The Kojiki knows this. This is one of the things the Kojiki does that no later text quite does in the same way. It watches how the present grew out of the past. It traces the roots. It says, the place is called this name because this thing happened there, because this person passed through, because this fire burned, because this sword cut this grass, because the world remembers in its names what happened in it. Part 3. Ototachibana Hime. There was a woman traveling with him. Her name was Ototachibana Hime, the younger princess of Tachibana, the wife of Yamato Takeru. She had been with him since before the Eastern campaign began, since before the fire in Sagami, since before the sword had its name. The Kojiki does not dwell on when they met, or how the decision was made, or what she thought of the man she married. It simply includes her in the story. At the moment her inclusion matters most, which is how the Kojiki handles many of the women in it, present when they are essential, not explained before, or much mourned after. What she thought of him, what it was like to travel with him through the provinces, watching him defeat one enemy after another, watching the fear in people's faces when they understood what had come to their territory, what it was like to love someone who contained that much force and could not entirely control where it went. The Kojiki does not say. What it says is what she did. From Sagami, the province of the burnt field, Yamato Takeru moved toward the sea. He needed to cross to Kazusa, to the province on the far side of the water, to continue his campaign eastward. He stood at the shore and looked at the crossing, and did something that the Kojiki records, without particular emphasis, the way it records many things that later seemed important. He said, "This is a small sea. I could jump across it. This is the quality that will eventually destroy him, not the strength, the pride, the inability, at the moment of success, to keep the full weight of himself from tipping forward into the space where caution should be." He called the sea small. He said he could jump across it. He stepped into the boat and began to cross. The sea god heard him. The sea gods are not inclined toward patience with those who call their waters small. The water that has crossed the whole width of the ocean, the water that swallowed ships and held the drowned in its deep cold dark, the water that had been there before the islands were made, and would be there after the islands were gone, did not appreciate being called small by a young man in a boat. The sea rose, the waves came, the boat was thrown, the crossing that had seemed like nothing became suddenly everything, became the entire world, became the difference between. Arriving on the far shore, and being at the bottom of the water, Ototachibana Hime was in the boat with him. She looked at the water. She looked at Yamato Takeru. She understood what had happened, why the water was rising, what would stop it. She spoke. She said that she would enter the water, the way someone says something that does not require explanation. This is all she said. One sentence. The Kojiki gives her one sentence before the act. Not because she was asked, not because anyone required it of her, because she saw what was needed, and she was the one standing there, and she chose it. She laid down sedge matting on the water. She spread deerskin on the matting. She stepped out of the boat, and onto the matting, and down into the sea. The waves calmed. The water that had been raging went still. The sea god, given what the sea god required, withdrew. The boat reached the far shore. Yamato Takeru went on. He went on east past the burnt field and the calmed sea, past the place where the woman who loved him had walked into the water. He went to the mountains of Kai, and through them into Shinano, and through that into Owari, and through all of it, continuing the campaign, subduing the gods who needed subduing, speaking to the people who would speak, fighting the ones who would only fight. But something had changed. The Kojiki notes it. In a small moment, Yamato Takeru came to a peak, a mountain pass, and he looked back. Over the ground he had crossed, over the sea he had crossed, and he said, Azumahaya, my wife. The word Azuma meant east, but when Yamato Takeru said it, looking back at the sea, it meant my wife. It meant the person who went into the water. It meant the one who is not here, and the place where he stood, when he said it, became the place called Azuma. The east, the word for the east, became the word because of what he said. When he looked back from a mountain pass at the sea that had taken her, the names remember, the names carry what was felt long after the person who felt it is gone. He went on to Sagami again, to the mountains, to the land near the great mountain that the old Japanese called Huzi, the mountain that stands alone in the center of the islands, visible from a long way away, perfect in its shape, the way that things that have grown for a very long time become perfect, become exactly the shape they were always going to be. He passed that mountain on his way north and east, and further east still, through Michinoku, through the farthest reaches of what was then Japan's edge, the place where the emperor's authority reached its limits, and the people who had always lived there, in their own way, were being asked for the first time to be part of something larger. Some agreed, some did not. Yamato Takeru dealt with both. He was going home. The campaign was done. The East, as far as he had been asked to go, was brought into the order. He had done what his father asked. He was going home to Yamato, through Owari, through the province where a woman named Miyazu-hime was waiting for him, a woman he had promised to come back to, a woman who had kept that promise in her own way, holding it carefully, keeping it safe, waiting. He arrived in Owari. He went to Miyazu-hime. She had kept something for him. She had kept the possibility of rest, the possibility of a quiet room, and familiar company, and the particular piece of a place that knows you and has been waiting for you to come back. He stayed. For a while he simply stayed. The campaign was over. The East was done. He was in a house in Owari with a woman who was glad to see him, and the sword was hanging on the wall, and there was food and warmth, and the things that warriors are always thinking about when they are far from them. But then he heard about Ibukiyama, the mountain of Ibuki. There was a god on that mountain, a god who had not submitted, a god who was still outside the order, still in the old way, the old resistance. Yamato Takeru heard about it and thought, I will go. He did not take the sword. This is the thing that is always noted. The sword that had saved him in the fire. The sword that had been in the tail of Yamata no Orochi. The sword that his aunt had given him. He left it with Miyazu-hime. He said, I will not need it. He said, I am strong enough. He said, it is only one God. Pride. The same pride that called the sea small. The same pride that was always there, just below the surface of the force, always looking for a moment of success to step forward into. He left the sword. He went to the mountain. Part 4. The Mountain God. The god of Ibukiyama appeared as a white boar. Yamato Takeru saw it on the mountainside, white and large, standing in the path, very still. He said, that white boar must be a messenger of the god. I will deal with the god when I come down. I will leave the boar for now. He was wrong. The white boar was not a messenger. The white boar was the god itself, the god in the form it had chosen for this particular encounter, and in saying I will deal with it later, in treating the divine as something that could be scheduled, as something that could wait, while more important things were handled first. Yamato Takeru made the last of the mistakes that his pride had been building toward. The mountain god struck, not directly, not with the simple force that Yamato Takeru had always faced before. The fire and the swords and the enemies who came at him from outside, this was different. Hail came down. Ice, cold, so intense that it entered him, the way cold enters when something inside you has already opened to it, when the protection you always carried has been left somewhere else. The cold got into him. He came down the mountain, confused. His mind was not clear. His legs were not steady, in the way they had always been steady. The mountain had done something to him that nothing in the west and nothing in the east had managed to do. There was a spring at the foot of the mountain. He found it. He drank from it, the cold, clear water of the mountain spring, and his mind cleared a little. Not entirely, but a little. Enough to move. Enough to know which direction was home. The spring is called Tachizumi now, the Standing Well Spring, named for the moment when the man who had defeated everyone he had ever faced stood at a spring and held himself upright by drinking cold water. He walked. He walked toward Owari, toward Yamato, toward home, but his legs were not right. Something had been taken on the mountain that did not come back. With the cold water of the spring, he walked with a staff. The ground in that part of the country is called Suenotsuki now, the place where the staff was planted, because Yamato Takeru drove his staff into the ground there when walking became too difficult to do. Without that support, he kept walking through Nobono, through the land that is now in Mie on the coast, where the sea comes in and the wind smells of salt, and the distance between where you are and where you want to be feels very large. He stopped there. He made poems. This is what the Kojiki does. At the end of a life, it gives the poems the last things said, the things that were said when there was nothing left to do but say them. He looked toward Yamato, toward the homeland. The word he used was Kunishinobio Mohu, missing the homeland, longing for the place that had sent him away again and again, and that he was trying for the last time to reach. He said something that means, roughly in the translation that cannot quite catch it, "Oh, Yamato, it lies like folded cloth in layers of mountains. Among the mountain-enclosed Yamato, it is the most beautiful. Yamato was the palace. Yamato was the emperor's court. Yamato was the father who had sent him away, and sent him away again, and who he was trying to return to, even now. He missed it. Despite everything, despite the sending away, despite the exhaustion, despite the cold on the mountain, and the woman in the sea, and all the things that had been taken, he missed the folded mountains, and the enclosed landscape, and whatever it meant to him to have come from that particular place, and to be trying to get back to it. Yamato Takeru died at Nobono. He died as the heroes of the old stories die, not peacefully, not after a long life, not in the ordinary way of someone who has lived their full measure of days and come to the end of them without urgency. He died in the middle of things, still strong in most of him, still the person who had not been defeated by any person, defeated only by the mountain, and by what the mountain had pointed to the thing inside him that had always been a little too much for the world it was in. When he died, a white bird flew up. The Kojiki says this clearly. He died, and a white bird rose from the place where he lay, and flew away, large and white, flying toward the sea, flying south, flying toward Yamato. The people who had loved him followed the bird. They could not keep up on land. They waded into the sea, into the shallows, their robes wet, their legs struggling against the water, following the bird. The way you follow something you know you cannot catch, but cannot stop yourself from following. This is what the Kojiki says in the poem they made as they followed. In the sea where we walk, the grass of the sea, the grass of the shore, the grass of the beach, we are in the sea. The bird is in the air. The distance between us is complete, and we walk anyway. He was buried at Shiratori, the white bird tomb, and the white bird flew toward Yamato and landed, and they buried him there too, at the place where the bird rested. And then the bird flew to Kawachi, and they buried him there as well. 3 tombs, 3 places where the earth was opened for him. 3 places in Japan that carry something of him still, that hold in their ground the weight of what passed through. This is Yamato Takeru, the boy who was too strong for his family, the man who was too strong for most of the people he met, the one who wept at his aunt's shrine, the one who called the sea small, the one whose wife walked into the water, the one who left the sword, the one who missed Yamato in the last poems he ever made, not the hero of a story that ends well, the hero of a story that ends the way most true stories end, with the person in the middle of it, still wanting the thing they always wanted, still unable to get there, still trying. The white bird, flying, the long way home, Part 5, the Emperor's After. The Kojiki does not end with Yamato Takeru. His story is the most vivid in the middle volume, the most complete, the one given the most space and the most poetry, the one that reads most like a story, and least like a chronicle. But the Kojiki continues after him. It continues through the emperors who came after, one generation at a time, each one adding something to the record, each one leaving something behind that the Kojiki thought worth keeping. The emperor who came after Keiko Tenno, the father who had sent Yamato Takeru away again and again, was Seimu Tenno. He was Yamato Takeru's brother, not the brother who was killed. Another brother, the one who survived, the one who was not too strong, and was therefore allowed to stay. Seimu Tenno ruled for long years. The Kojiki gives him his genealogy, his wives, his children, the careful accounting of the line. That was the whole reason the Kojiki was compiled in the first place, the line from the gods to the living emperor, the unbroken thread. He had children. His children had children. The line continued. This is what the Kojiki is doing in these later sections, what it is always doing. Underneath the stories, it is documenting continuity. It is saying, look at this line. Look how it runs. From the age of the gods, from Izanagi washing his face in the sea, and producing the sun and the moon and the storm, through all the generations of the divine, through Ninigi descending from the sky, with the mirror and the jewel and the sword, through the long line of the early emperors, all the way to the living moment, unbroken. The line was everything in the understanding of the people who compiled the Kojiki. The line was the reason Japan was Japan, not the land, not the people. The line, the continuous bloodline, from the gods to the emperor, that made everything else what it was. Then came Chuai Tenno. He was the son of Yamato Takeru, the white bird's son, the son of the man who had been too strong and had gone to every corner of the islands and had died looking back toward the folded mountains of home. Chuai Tenno was not his father. No one was his father, but he had his father's task, which was the task of all the emperors, to extend the reach of Yamato, to bring the people who were not yet part of the order into the order, to go where the authority did not yet go, and establish it there. He was interested in the sea beyond the islands, the land across the water to the west, the land called Chiusen now, which was in those days a collection of kingdoms with their own histories and their own gods and their own ways of doing things. That had nothing to do with Yamato. A god spoke to him through his wife. The wife of Chuai Tenno was Jingu Kogo, the Empress Jingu. The god spoke through her using her voice, the way divine messages sometimes come in the Kojiki, not through thunderclaps or visions in the sky, but through a person, through the body of a person who is capable of being used that way, who is open to it. The god said, "There is a land to the west. There is a land across the sea, a land of gold and silver, and all the beautiful things. I will give it to you." Chuai Tenno was skeptical. He looked westward. Across the sea, he could not see any land. He said, "If I look, there is no such land. The god must be deceiving me." The god was not pleased. The god said, "You do not believe. Then the land will not come to you. It will go to the one who is not yet born." Chuai Tenno died shortly after. The Kojiki is matter of fact about this. He doubted the god. He died. The connection between the two is left for the reader to understand. Jingu Kogo did not doubt the god. This is the beginning of one of the most extraordinary sections of the Kojiki, the story of an empress who took her dead husband's campaign and completed it herself. She was pregnant. the child not yet born, the child the god had said would receive the land. That Chuaiteno had doubted. She prepared herself for the crossing. She made sure the child would wait until she returned. She was going to go west, and she was going to win, and then she was going to come back, and only then would the child come into the world. She led the army herself. She went down to the southern sea, to the crossing, and the god helped her. The fish came under the boats, and the wind came from behind, and the waves drove the fleet forward, and the land across the water rose. Out of the sea ahead of them, the kingdom of Shiragi, one of the kingdoms of the land to the west, submitted without fighting. The king looked at the fleet coming toward him, and understood what he was looking at, and said, "From this day forward, we will serve you." The other kingdoms followed. Jingu Kogo came back. She came back to the islands, with the submission of the western lands, with the beginning of a relationship between the islands of Japan and the peninsula to the west that would shape the next several centuries of what Japan would become. The child was born. His name was Ujin Tenu, the Emperor Ojin, and Ojin is one of the places where the Kojiki ends, or begins to end, where the chronicle that started with the cracking of the cosmic egg and the rise of the first gods approaches the present moment of the people who compiled it. Ojin was deified after his death. He became Hachima no Kami, the god of war, the god of archery, one of the most widely worshipped gods in Japan. There are more shrines to Hachiman in Japan than to any other deity. They are in every city. They are in small towns. They are on mountainsides, and at crossroads, and in neighborhoods, and at the edges of rice fields. The man who was born after his mother held her pregnancy, with stones bound to her body while she led a fleet across the sea, became the god whose shrines are everywhere. This is the Kojiki's understanding of how the divine and the human move into each other, how a person becomes a god, how the human accumulates enough of the extraordinary that after death it is recognized as something more than human, something that should be approached with the particular attention we give to the things that exceed ordinary explanation. The Kojiki's middle volume ends here, not because there is nothing more to say. The lower volume goes on through more emperors, more wives and children and campaigns, more poems and more stories, and more of the careful genealogy. That was the whole purpose of the compilation. But the middle volume, the volume of Yamato Takeru and Jingu Kogo, and the crossing of the sea ends with Ojin, ends with the man who would become the most widely worshipped god of the ordinary Japanese world, the god in the neighborhood shrine, the god at the crossroads, the god whose shrine you pass on your way to work without necessarily knowing what it is you are passing. You are passing Ojin. You are passing the son of the woman who bound stones to her body and crossed the sea. You are passing the grandson of the man who called the sea small and paid for it. You are passing the great descendant of Ninigi, who came down through the clouds from the high plane of heaven with the mirror and the jewel and the sword. All of that is in the small shrine at the corner of the street. All of it is present there, or the Kojiki believes it is, which is perhaps the same thing. Part 6. What the sword carries. There is a sword in Japan that has been in one place for more than 1,000 years. It is in Atsuta Jingu, the great shrine of Atsuta, in the city that is now called Nagoya, on the coast of the central island. The shrine is old. Its trees are old. The camphor trees of Atsuta are among the oldest living things in Japan, their trunks wider than several people, standing arm to arm, their canopies covering ground that has been sacred since before sacred was a word anyone had for it. In the innermost building of that shrine, in the place that is not opened, in the dark that is maintained, because certain things require darkness to remain what they are, the sword is kept. Kusanagi no Tsurugi, the grass-cutting sword, the third of the 3 sacred treasures. No one living has seen it. It is not shown. It is not displayed. It is simply there, in the dark, held in the dark. The way certain truths are held, the way certain facts about the world are more powerful when they are not exposed to ordinary light. The sword has a history. It began, as we know, in the tale of Yamato Orochi, 35 centuries ago, or 5,000 years ago, or in the time before time is counted, whenever Yamato Orochi fell at last in the river red with its blood, and Susanoo's sword struck something in the tale that should not have been there. He pulled it out. He sent it to Amaterasu. She kept it. She gave it to Ninigi. When he descended through the clouds, it came down to the earth with the divine lineage, one of the 3 things that meant the right to rule. Then it moved. This is the part of the sword's history that the Kojiki touches on, but does not fully explain. The sword left the imperial palace. At some point in the early generations, it did not stay with the emperors. It moved. Some traditions say this was because the sword began to affect the place it was in, that its presence was too powerful, that things in the palace went wrong in ways that could be traced back to the force of what was kept there, a sword that came from a serpent, a sword that had been in the dark, inside that vast and terrible body, for longer than anyone knew, a sword that carried in it the particular energy of the serpent's age and the serpent's power and the serpent's relationship with the river and the mountain and the land of Izumo. This sword was not a neutral object. It was not simply metal. It was not simply a weapon. It was the concentrated presence of something very old that had been there before the gods came down from the sky and organized the world. The emperors kept it, and it disrupted things. They moved it away, and the disruption eased. This is the Kojiki's understanding of how powerful objects work. They have their own requirements. They need to be in the right place, with the right person, handled in the right way. Otherwise, their power does not serve. It simply is, indifferent to whether what it does is helpful or harmful. The sword was given to Yamato Hime, the keeper of the shrine, the aunt of Yamato Takeru, the woman who stands at the meeting place of the human and the divine. She kept it at Ise, in the innermost place, until her nephew came weeping to her door, and she gave it to him, to take east. He took it east. He named it. He left it with Miyazu Hime. When he went to Ibukiyama, he did not come back for it. Miyazu Hime kept it. The wife in Owari, the woman he had stayed with briefly, after the Eastern campaign, the woman he had promised to return to, and had returned to, and had left again, for the last time. She kept the sword. She took it to Atsuta. She established the shrine. She put the sword in the dark, where it has been ever since. This is how the Kojiki traces things. The sword that came from the serpent, that was given to the sun goddess, that came down from the sky with Ninigi, that was given to the weeping young man at the shrine of Ise, that cut the grass of Sagami and named a city that was left on a wall in Owari, while its owner went to his death on a mountain, that was carried to a shrine by a woman who had waited for a man who did not return, is still there in the dark of Atsuta Jingu, in the city by the sea, still there, still present, still held. The woman who placed it there loved the man who carried it. Her love is in the placement, her faithfulness to what he had left behind is in the dark of the shrine, along with the sword. The two things together, the sword and the love that kept it. The name matters too. Yamato Takeru, the valiant one of Yamato, given by a dying enemy, the last thing the leader of Kumaso could offer to the person who had just defeated him. This is one of the things that the Kojiki understands about names, that they are not given by the person who carries them. They are given by the encounter with the world, by the moments that reveal what something actually is. Wusunomi Koto was the name he was born with, the small mortar prince, a boy's name, the name of someone who had not yet done what would make the name inadequate. He became Yamato Takeru when the person he had defeated recognized in him something worth recognizing. The name was a gift from defeat, given at sword point, given by someone who had nothing left to give, except the acknowledgement of what had just happened to them. There is something in this that the Kojiki returns to again and again in different forms, the idea that the most important things come from the encounters you did not plan, from the places you were sent, rather than the places you chose, from the people who recognized something in you that you had not quite seen in yourself yet. Wusu became Yamato Takeru. In the land of Kumaso, far from Yamato, far from the father who sent him, far from any place where anyone knew who he had been before, he became what he became because of where he was sent and what happened there, and how the person whose death he caused responded to that death. The name carried everything after. It carried the female disguise and the sword hidden inside the robe. It carried the false sword of wood and the real one in the scabbard. It carried the fire in Sagami and the grass cutting and the name of the sword. It carried the sea and what it took. It carried the poems from the mountain pass and from No Bono, and all the longing for home that ran through them. Yamato Takeru, the name that was given and the name that was earned, were the same name. The name that was given by the dying became the name. That meant all of that. The sword is still there. The name is still there. The things that mattered remain in one form or another present in the world that was shaped by what happened to them. Part 7. Jingu Kogo. The Kojiki gives women less space than men. This is simply true. The genealogies are mostly of men. The stories are mostly about men, the gods who descended from the sky and built the land and made the first poem and found the sword in the serpent, were mostly in the telling centered on male figures. The women are present. They are often essential. They are sometimes the most important person in the scene they appear in, but they are given less space. Jingu Kogo is an exception. She is given more space than almost any other woman. In the Kojiki's 3 volumes, her story is told in detail. Her actions are recorded carefully. What she did is described in the particular register the Kojiki uses when it wants you to understand that this was important, that this happened, that this matters. She was the wife of Chuai Tenno, the 14th emperor, the son of Yamato Takeru's son, the great-grandson of the white bird. Chuai Tenno was not a bad emperor. He was not a weak emperor. He was simply an emperor who, when the god came to him through the voice of his wife and told him there was a land to the west, looked at the sea and saw no land, and said so. There is a kind of honesty in this, the honesty of a person who will not pretend to believe what they cannot see, the honesty that serves well in many situations and badly in others. In this situation, it served badly. The god did not want to be disbelieved. The god had come to offer something real something that could change the shape of what was possible, and the emperor had looked at the sea and said he could not see what was being offered. The emperor died. The god went to the wife. Jingu Kogo received the god. She did not look at the sea and say she saw nothing. She listened. She received. She understood that the thing being offered was real, that the land to the west existed, that the god knew things she did not, and was offering to share them. She was pregnant. The child inside her was the son of Chuai Tenno, the son who would become Ojin Tenno, the son who would become Hachiman. She was pregnant and her husband was dead, and the god was telling her there was a land to the west that should come under the authority of Yamato. She picked up the stones, the cold stones, the river stones, smooth and heavy. She bound them to her body. She pressed the pregnancy back, made the body understand that this was not the time, that the time would come, but not yet, that first there was something to do. The stones were cold, and the pressure was constant, and she wore them for the length of the campaign, and the crossing, and the return. She went to the sea. The preparations were made. The ships were gathered. The army was assembled. But before any of that, she went to the water, and she performed the rituals. She asked the sea. She asked for permission. She asked the gods of the water and the gods of the wind to let the crossing happen. The fish came. The fish came under the ships, in the way that fish come, when something is right, when the conditions are aligned, when the water itself is willing to carry what is on it. The wind came from the right direction. The waves pushed the fleet forward, rather than against it. The crossing that might have been difficult was not difficult. The sea that had given Chuai Tenno no land to see, when he looked at it from the shore, now showed the land to the west, to the fleet that was crossing toward it. She arrived at the western land. The king of Shiragi stood at the shore and looked at what was coming. The fleet, the army, the woman at its head. He had heard things, perhaps, or he read the moment correctly, the way certain people can read a moment and understand what it requires of them, without being told explicitly. He submitted. He said, "From this day forward, I will serve you. My horses will cross the sea to you. My ships will cross the sea to you. I will serve the land of Yamato, as long as there is land and sea." The other kingdoms followed. Kudara, Kokuri. They sent tribute. They made the acknowledgments required. They entered into the relationship that would shape the next centuries. Of both places, the relationship between the islands and the peninsula, the exchange of things and people and ideas, that gave Japan Buddhism and written characters and silk and iron and everything that changed, what it meant to be Japan. All of that began here, with a woman who bound stones to her body, and crossed the sea. She came back. She removed the stones. The pregnancy resumed its ordinary time. The child descended into the world in the way children come at the proper time when the body said it was time. They called him Ojin. He grew up knowing what his mother had done. He grew up in the space that she had made, the space of what was now possible. That had not been possible before, the changed shape of the world that her campaign had created. He became a great emperor. The Kojiki gives him long life, great accomplishments, many children. He was honored after his death in the way that certain people come to be honored after their deaths, not through formal decision, but through accumulation, through the slow gathering of reverence. That happens when enough people, over enough time, come to a shrine and ask for help, and feel that the help arrived. Hachiman, the god of the 8 banners, the god of war and archery, and the protection of the state, enshrined everywhere, in every city, at every crossroads, the child who was held in place by stones, while his mother crossed the sea. The Kojiki does not moralize about any of this. It does not say that Jingu Kogo was heroic, or that Chuai Tenno was wrong. It does not offer a lesson. It does not tell you what to think. It records. It says, this is what happened. This is the sequence. This is what one thing led to. The husband doubted. The god offered it to someone else. The wife did not doubt. The son was born after the crossing. The son became a god. The god is at the corner of your street. This is the chain. These are the links. The Kojiki lays them out and trusts the reader to understand what they mean. And what they mean is something like this. The world is not random. The things that happen are connected to the things that follow. The doubt and the death and the crossing and the child and the god are one sequence, one thing leading to the next. You cannot pull one link out and leave the chain intact. You cannot have the god at the corner of the street without the doubt. That sent the task to someone who would not doubt. You cannot have the crossing without the death that made it necessary. You cannot have the child without the stones that held him, while his mother did what needed to be done. The bad things and the good things are in the same chain. The doubt and the god, the death and the crossing, the impossible choice, and the thing that became possible because of it. The Kojiki does not say this is just. It does not say this is kind. It simply records that this is how it went, and it trusts the reader to sit with that and find in it what there is to find. Part 8. The Shape of Heroism. The Kojiki's heroes are not simple. This is one of the things that separates it from later versions of the same stories, the versions that come down through centuries of retelling and get simpler with each telling the rough edges worn smooth, the complications resolved, the character made consistent, in the way that a person you don't know is always consistent, always explainable by a single trait, rather than the multiple contradictions that define an actual life. Yamato Takeru is not a simple hero. He killed his brother. He wept at his aunt's shrine. He wore a woman's robe to kill an enemy. He called the sea small and paid for it. His wife died because of his pride. He left the sword when he should have kept it. He died in the middle of things, still trying to get home. All of this is him. The Kojiki does not try to remove the killing of the brother from the story of the hero. It does not try to make the pride into something else. It does not soften the ending or provide a redemption. That cancels out the failures. It says, here is the person. Here is all of it. Here is what they did, and what it cost, and what was left when they were gone. This is one of the oldest things about the Japanese literary tradition, the thing that will become, in later centuries, the aesthetic concept of mono no ware, the pathos of things, the sadness that beautiful things exist and pass, the feeling that the world is more moving, precisely because it does not last, that the cherry blossoms are beautiful, because they fall, that the hero is moving, because he dies, that the love is worth remembering, because it ended. Mono no ware is often attributed to later writers, to Murasaki Shikibu and the Genzi Monogatari, to the poets of the following centuries, who made the awareness of impermanence into a philosophy of beauty, but it is already here, in the Kojiki, in the poems Yamato Takeru makes at Nobono, in the way he misses Yamato, just before he dies, in the white bird flying, over people wading into the sea. The Kojiki did not know it was creating an aesthetic tradition. It was simply recording. But what it was recording contained in it already the emotional intelligence that would define Japanese literature for the next 1,000 years. The woman who enters the water, Ototachibana Hime's moment, is one of the briefest in the Kojiki. One sentence. She said she would enter the water, and then she stepped out of the boat and down into the sea, and the waves calmed, and the story continued. Without her, this is how sacrifice works in the Kojiki, not with great drama, not with long speeches, or the careful explanation of motivations, with a statement, with a step, with the body doing the thing that the situation requires, before the mind has time to argue against it, and then the world continues. The boat reaches the shore. Yamato Takeru goes on. The campaign continues. The east is pacified, and later, at a mountain pass, he looks back at the sea and says her name, Azuma Haya, my wife. This is all he says. The Kojiki does not give him a long speech. It does not describe grief. in detail. 2 words, my wife, and the place is named for those 2 words, and the naming explains why the East is called the East in the old language. This is the Kojiki's understanding of how loss works. It becomes a place, it becomes a name, it becomes something in the geography of the world that other people will walk through long after the person who felt it is gone. The grief becomes a landmark. The landmark tells the story to everyone who passes it, and everyone who passes it understands at some level what happened in that place, even if they do not know the details, even if the story has been worn smooth by time. The aunt, Yamato Himeno appears twice. The first time to send her nephew south with a robe and a bag and an instruction she did not explain. The second time to send him east with a sword and a bag and a warning she could not help being specific about. Be careful. Do not be careless. She knew, or she intuited, or she had been at the shrine long enough to understand that the people who are most likely to die by carelessness are the ones who have never been careless before, because they have never learned to respect the moment when the carelessness arrives. She gave him everything she could, the sword, the bag, the warning, and then she watched him go east. She would not see him again. The Kojiki does not tell us what she felt when his death was reported. It does not give her a poem. It does not give her a scene at the end of his story where she learns what happened and responds. She simply disappears from the narrative after the second time she appears. But everything that came after in his story was shaped by what she gave him. The sword named the fire. The bag saved him from it. The warning was given and not heard, and the not hearing of it was the beginning of the end. She is in all of it, even when she is not there. This is how the Kojiki treats the important women, not by making them central, not by giving them the most space, but by making the things they give, the things that everything else depends on. Izanami made the world and died. Amaterasu hid and came back. Ototachibana Hime went into the sea. Yamato Hime gave the sword. Jingu Kogo bound stones to her body and crossed the sea. Without any of these, the story would not be the story. The world would not be the world. The shape of things would be different. The Kojiki knows this, even if it does not say it in so many words. It knows it in the way it includes them, in the precision of what it records, in the moments it chooses to preserve in its pages, and the moments it lets pass without recording. The white bird. This is the image that stays. Not the fire in Sagami, not the sword in the serpent's tail, not the female disguise. In the hall of Kumaso, the white bird, rising from the place where he died, flying south, the people wading into the sea, the Japanese word for the crane, and the Japanese word for the white bird, and the Japanese understanding of what it means for a soul to take the form of a bird are all present in this image. The bird that flies too high to follow, the bird that can go where people cannot, the bird that carries the soul to the place the soul needs to go. Yamato Takeru flies home. He could not walk home. He was too sick to walk. He was trying and failing, and the trying was killing him, faster than the mountain had. But after he died, he flew. In the white bird image, the Kojiki offers something it does not often offer. In the histories of the emperors, a kind of grace, a kind of mercy, the acknowledgement that the thing the person most wanted was the thing that came to them. At the end, he wanted to get home. He could not walk there. He flew. This is the ending the Kojiki gives him. Not the failure, not the slow dying at Nobono, not the 3 tombs, the white bird, flying, south and home. Part 9. The names the land carries. Japan is full of names. Every mountain has a name. Every river, every province and district and harbor and cape, every place that was ever significant to anyone who passed through it and understood what had happened there and wanted to mark it in the way that humans mark things, which is by giving them a name and telling the story of the name to everyone who will listen. The Kojiki is partly a book of these names. It explains them. It says, this place is called this because this thing happened here. This bay is called this because of the wave that came. This mountain is called this because of the god who settled there. This plain is called this because of the fire that burned. This spring is called this because of the man who stood there and gathered himself. When you know these stories, Japan becomes a different kind of place, not a landscape, a text written in place names, in the shapes of mountains, in the courses of rivers, in the locations of shrines, and the distances between them, in the particular associations that certain places carry, in the Japanese imagination, the way that certain words carry more than their dictionary definition. Yaidu, the city on the coast of Shizuoka, named for the burning. Yaidu means something like the burning place, the place where fire spread. You can go there, you can stand on the coast and look at the bay and know that the story of the grass-cutting sword happened somewhere near there, that the fire was set here, that the counter-fire was lit here, that the sword became what it is called somewhere in this landscape. The name carries it. The name has been carrying it for more than 1,000 years. Every person who has ever lived in Yaidu, or passed through it, or shipped fish from its harbor, has been living in the place where the sword got its name, whether they knew it or not. Azuma, the east, the word for the eastern part of Japan, the word for the eastern half of the country, for the whole direction, for everything that is on that side of the mountain passes that divide the island. The word came from two words, Azumahaya, my wife, the words that Yamato Takeru said at the mountain pass when he looked back at the sea. Every time someone says the word Azuma, they are, in the Kojiki's understanding, saying those two words again. Every time someone refers to Eastern Japan, they are referencing the moment of a hero looking back at the water that took someone he loved. This is how the Kojiki understands language. Words are not arbitrary. They are not agreed upon sounds with agreed upon meanings. That could as easily be different. Words came from somewhere. They came from moments. They came from the specific occasions when someone felt something strongly enough to say it, and what they said became the word for what they felt and what they were looking at when they felt it. Tachizumi, the standing well spring, the spring at the foot of Ibuki-yama, where Yamato Takeru stopped after coming down from the mountain that had struck him with cold. He stood there. He drank. He steadied himself. The spring is called the spring where he stood. This is what springs are for. In the Kojiki, not for irrigation, not for drinking water in the ordinary sense, for the moment when someone who has been struck by something they underestimated finds the cold, clear water at the base of the mountain and drinks and is able for a little while to be steady. The spring is still there in Mie, on the way between Ibuki-yama and the coast where Yamato Takeru died, Shiratori no Misasagi, the White Bird Tomb. There are 3 of them, 3 tombs in 3 provinces where the White Bird rested. The first is in Nobono, where he died. The second is in Yamato, where the bird flew and landed. The third is in Kawachi, where the bird flew and landed again. 3 places, 3 openings in the earth, 3 times the name. The name of the tomb is the name of the bird. The name of the bird is the name of the soul. The soul is still in motion, in the name, even after the tomb is closed, even after the earth is sealed. The name says the bird says the flight says the soul says him. This is what the Kojiki preserves, not just the events and their names, the events and what the events became in the ongoing life of the place. The Kojiki understood, the people who compiled it understood, that a story is not finished when the events in it are done. The story continues in the names the events leave behind, in the places the events shaped, in the understanding that the people who came after carried with them as they moved through the landscape that had been shaped by what happened in it. To read the Kojiki is to learn how to read Japan. Not Japan as it is described from outside, from the perspective of someone who is looking at it as a place that is different from other places, but Japan as it understands itself, as a place whose every significant feature has a story behind it, a story that explains why the place is what it is, and how it got its name, and what happened there. That was worth remembering. The cherry blossoms fall. This too is in the Kojiki, the Princess Konohana no Sakuyabi Mei, whose name means she who makes the flowers of the trees to bloom, whose father was the mountain god, who was offered to Ninigi, along with her sister Iwanagahi Mei, whose name means long rock, permanence, endurance. Ninigi chose the blossom. He sent the rock back, and so the imperial line lives, like the blossom, beautiful, brief, not like the rock. The cherry blossoms fall every year, and every year Japan stops to watch them fall, and every year the falling is the same as the falling. It has always been beautiful precisely because it ends, moving precisely because it passes. This was always in the choice that Ninigi made on the mountain of Takachiho when the two sisters came to him, and he chose the one whose name was the blooming, rather than the one whose name was the staying. The land carries all of it. The mountains carry it. The rivers carry it. The shrines carry it. The names of the provinces and the cities and the springs and the tombs carry it, and the stories carry it. The stories that were told before there was writing, and that were written down so they could be told forever, so that the knowledge of what happened in the land could survive the people who first knew it and pass to the people who came after and would need to understand the place they had been born into. This is what the Kojiki is, a way of carrying the land. Part 10, The Emperors Between, the middle volume of the Kojiki, contains more than Yamato Takeru, between Zinmu, the first emperor, and Keiko Tenno, the father who sent Yamato Takeru away. There are 11 generations of emperors, 11 generations of the line that came down from the sky with Ninigi and had been building its authority in Yamato and spreading its reach through the islands. Most of them are names. The Kojiki gives them genealogies, wives, children, lifespans that grow shorter as the divine blood is diluted by the human, and the human lifespan asserts itself more fully. But some of them have stories. Sujin Tenno, the 10th emperor, is called the first emperor by some scholars of the Kojiki, not because Zinmu was not the first, but because Sujin Tenno is the first emperor, whose reign has a character beyond the genealogy, whose time had things happen in it that the Kojiki thought worth recording in detail. In Sujin Tenu's time, there was a plague. The people were dying. The fields were not being worked. The country was struggling in the way that countries struggle when the invisible force that underlies things is not aligned with what is happening on the surface. Sujin Teno asked why. He was told through a dream. The god Omononushi came to him and said, "The plague is because of me. I am not worshipped properly. Find the man whose name is Otataneko. Have him worship me. The plague will end." The emperor sent out messengers to find Otataneko. He was found in Kawachi, a man who did not know. He was who the god wanted, a man living an ordinary life in an ordinary province, who turned out to be the great-great-great-grandson of the god himself, the descendant of Omononushi, and the woman he had loved, born generations later, in a different province, but still carrying in his blood the particular relationship with the divine that made him the right person to perform the worship. Otataneko was brought to the emperor. He was identified. He performed the worship. The plague ended. This story is doing several things at once. It is explaining why certain families in Japan have the right to perform certain rituals, why the priesthood of a particular shrine belongs to a particular family, why the blood connection to the divine that was established in the age of the gods still matters in the age of the emperors, but it is also saying something about how the divine works. The divine did not send a message to the emperor directly. It did not say, "I am Omononushi, the god who helped build the land," with Okuni Nushi, the god who was enshrined at Miwayama, and I am not being worshipped properly, and this is why people are dying. It came in a dream. It gave a name. It said, "Find this person." The divine works through the particular, through specific people, through the particular person whose blood or whose attention or whose willingness to be present makes them the right vessel for what needs to be carried. This is consistent throughout the Kojiki. The gods do not act directly on the physical world in most cases. They work through people. They find the person who is capable of receiving what needs to be received, and through that person, they do what needs to be done. Sujin Teno also sent armies. He sent armies to the north and south and east and west, in his time establishing the reach of Yamato in the four directions, bringing the distant provinces into relationship with the center. He is remembered as the first emperor to truly govern the land in the practical sense, as opposed to the mythological sense, in which Zinmu descended from the sky and built a palace. His reign is when the country became something closer to what Japan would become when the authority of the center started to have reach, when the order that the gods had intended, when they agreed to give the land to Amaterasu's grandson, started to become real in the ordinary life of the people who lived in the land. Suinin Tenno, the 11th emperor, is known for a different kind of story. He had a woman named Sahobime, who was his consort, his great love, the woman he chose above others. Her brother was Sahobiko, and Sahobiko tried to use his sister's position to overthrow the emperor. He came to Sahobime and said, "Who do you love more, your husband or your brother?" She said, "My brother." He gave her a knife. He said, "Then kill the emperor while he sleeps." Sahobime took the knife. 3 times she raised it over the sleeping emperor. 3 times she could not strike. The 3rd time she wept. Her tears fell on the emperor's face. He woke. He asked what had happened. She told him everything, her brother's plan, her own inability to carry it out. The emperor sent armies against Sahobiko. The brother made a fortified granary and retreated into it and burned it with himself inside. Sahobime was pregnant. She had the child born inside the granary, inside the fire, the child coming into the world, in the place where her brother was dying. Then she died there too, in the fire, with her brother. The emperor had her child raised. He gave the child the name that connected it to its mother. This story is not about heroes or gods. It is about the impossible position of someone who is loved by 2 people who are in conflict with each other. The impossible choice between the loyalty of birth and the loyalty of love. Sahobime could not kill the emperor. She could not betray her brother. She died in the place where both of those things were true at once. The Kojiki records this. Without judging, it gives her no resolution, no redemption, no explanation for what should have been done differently. It says, "This happened. These were the impossible positions. This was the outcome," and moves on. Keiko Tenno, the 12th emperor, the father of Yamato Takeru, had more children than any other emperor. In the Kojiki, 80 children by multiple wives in multiple provinces. The Kojiki lists them, all of them, their names and their mothers and their provinces. This is the Kojiki in its genealogical mode, the mode that most readers find least engaging and most essential to the Kojiki's actual purpose, because the purpose was never only the stories. The purpose was the line. The purpose was to show that the lineage was real, that the connections existed, that the blood of the gods ran in a traceable path from the beginning to the present, and 80 children means 80 more lines, 80 more branches of the family that descended from the sky, 80 more people carrying in their blood the particular history that made them who they were. One of those 80 was Wusuno Mikoto, the small mortar prince, the one who would become Yamato Takeru. Among 80 children, he is the one the Kojiki gives most of its attention. not the oldest, not the heir, not the one who succeeded, the one who was sent away, the one who was too strong, the one who became the white bird. The Kojiki knows something about which stories matter, not the stories of uncomplicated success, not the stories of the emperors who ruled long and built palaces and had many children and died at a great age and were buried with ceremony. The stories that matter are the ones where something was impossible and someone tried it anyway, where the situation required more than the person had and the person gave it anyway, where the ending was wrong, in the way that certain endings are wrong, not because of incompetence or failure, but because of the gap between what a person was and what the world they were in could accommodate. Yamato Takeru was too much for his world. He was too strong for his family. He was too proud for the sea. He was too careless with what he had been given. He died before he could come home, and the Kojiki loves him for all of it, or at least it gives him the most space. It gives him the most poems. It gives him the most carefully observed and deeply felt of all the endings in the middle volume. The white bird, the waiting people, the three tombs, more than any other emperor, more care, more attention, more love for the one who was too much. Part 11. Ojin Tenno and What Came from the Sea. Ojin Tenno was born on a ship. Not exactly. He was born on land, but his mother was returning from the sea when she removed the stones that had held the pregnancy in place, and the story of his birth is inseparable from the story of the crossing, from the ships and the fish, and the calmed water, and the kingdoms that submitted. He was born as the consequence of a crossing. He was, in some sense, made of what his mother had done. He ruled for a long time. The Kojiki gives him a long reign, many years, many accomplishments. He established connections with the Western kingdoms that his mother had brought into relationship with Yamato. Those connections brought things to Japan that Japan had not had before. Writing. The Kojiki itself mentions this. In the reign of Ojin Tenno, a man from Kudara named Wanikishi came to Japan and brought the Anareku no Humi, the 1,000-character classic, and the Rongo, the collected sayings of Confucius. This is the moment when Japan encounters written language in a formal way, the moment when the spoken stories, the oral tradition that had carried everything until then, began to encounter the possibility of writing things down. The Kojiki was not written until 712 CE, more than 3 centuries after Ojin Tenno's reign, but the chain that connects the oral tradition to the written record passes through this moment, through the man from Kudara and the text he brought. Across the sea, everything that was later written down in Japan was made possible by this crossing the Kojiki itself, the Manyoshu, the Genzi Monogatari, everything that Japan would give to the world through its literary and artistic tradition, possible because a man brought books across the sea, possible because Ojin Tenno's mother had crossed the sea and made that relationship between the islands and the peninsula. The connections multiply. This is what history does. When you follow it far enough back, it becomes a web rather than a line. Every event connected to every other event by paths you did not expect, by consequences that traveled across generations and distances to arrive at places no one could have predicted. From the moment of origin, the serpent died in the river of Izumo. The sword came out of its tail. The sword went to the sun goddess. The sun goddess gave it to her grandson. The grandson descended from the sky. His descendant's aunt kept the sword. She gave it to a young man who wept. The young man cut grass with it in Sagami. The grass cutting gave the sword its name. The sword is in Atsuta Zingu now. The empress bound stones to her body. She crossed the sea. The kingdom submitted. A man came from Kudara with books. The books made writing possible. The writing made the Kojiki possible. The Kojiki carries the story of the serpent. The serpent's sword is in the story that the sword's cutting made possible. This is not mysticism. This is simply what it means to take the long view, to follow the thread, to understand that the things that seem most separate are in fact connected by paths that become visible only when you look backward far enough. The Kojiki was looking backward. That was its purpose, to look backward as far as the tradition could reach and trace the paths from there to here, from the cracking of the egg to the living emperor, from the first stirring in the universe to the person who was ruling now, from the serpent in the river to the sword in the shrine, all of it connected, all of it one thing, Hachiman, the god at the corner of the street. More shrines to Hachiman in Japan than to any other deity. More people who walk past one on their way to work than any other shrine. More prayers at more ordinary hours of ordinary days than any other god. And he is Ojin, and Ojin's mother crossed the sea, and her husband doubted the god, and the god offered the land to the one not yet born, and the one not yet born became the god who is at the corner of every street. Doubt was the beginning of it, the doubt of Shuai Tenno, who looked at the sea and saw no land, was the beginning of everything. That came after. If he had not doubted, the god would not have needed someone who did not doubt. If he had not doubted, Jingu Kogo might not have crossed the sea. If she had not crossed, Ojin might not have been what he became. If Ojin had not been what he became, Hachiman might not be. At the corner of the street, the doubt that ended one life was the condition of possibility. for everything that followed. The Kojiki does not say this. It simply tells the story in order. But the story in order is the argument. The lower volume. The Kojiki has a third volume. The lower volume, the volume that follows Ojin Tenno through the rest of the emperors, down to the emperor who was alive when the Kojiki was compiled. The lower volume is the most genealogical of the three. It has fewer stories, more names, more lists of wives and children, more of the careful accountancy of the line, but it has some stories, and those stories, even in the lower volume, even in the most chronicle-like part of the Kojiki, have the quality that all the stories have, the quality of being about something, more than the events, about what people did when the situation required more than was ordinary, about what the gods did when the humans were not enough, about the relationship between the divine and the human that runs through every page of all three volumes. The lower volume ends with the emperor who was alive when Onoya Sumaro wrote down what Hieda no Are had been carrying in memory, the emperor who commissioned the work, who said, "The old records are in danger, the oral tradition is at risk, write it down." And so it was written down. This moment matters, not just because it produced the Kojiki, but because of what it says about the people who produced it. They understood that the stories could be lost. They understood that the oral tradition, however strong, however carefully maintained, was vulnerable to the same things that everything human is vulnerable to: the death of the person who knew the most, the failure of transmission from one generation to the next, the gradual drift of versions away from whatever the original was. They decided that the stakes were too high to leave it to chance, that the stories of who Japan was, and where it came from, and what the gods had done, and what the heroes had done, and what the emperors had done, were worth the effort of writing down. So the effort was made. Hieda no Are, who had memorized the records on the order of an earlier emperor, sat with Onoya Sumaro and recited, and Onoya Sumaro wrote. He wrote in classical Chinese with Japanese pronunciation notes, added for the names and poems that could not be captured in Chinese characters alone. He wrote for months. He produced the 3 volumes. He presented them to the Empress. And here we are, 1300 years later. The stories are still here. The words are still here. The names are still here. Yamato Takeru died at Nobono and was buried at Shiratori, and the white bird flew south, and the stories are still here. The serpent was killed in the river of Izumo, and the sword came out of its tail, and the sword is in Atsuta, and the stories are still here. Izanagi washed his face in the sea, and the sun and the moon and the storm were born, and the sun is still rising and the stories are still here. This is what writing does. This is what the Kojiki did that the oral tradition could not quite do. It made the stories as durable as the landscape they describe, as durable as the mountains, as durable as the shrines, as durable as the spring at the foot of Ibuki, where a dying hero stood and drank cold water and tried to be steady. The spring is still there. The mountain is still there. The shrine is still there, with the dark at its center, and the sword in the dark, and the certainty of its presence in the understanding of the people who pass the shrine and stop and press their hands together and bow their heads. They do not need to have read the Kojiki to understand that something is there. The something is there, whether they have read it or not, whether they know the story of the serpent, or the story of the aunt, or the story of the grass cutting. The something is there. It has been there. For longer than memory, it will be there. After memory again. This is what the Kojiki preserves. Not just the events, the presence, the fact of the presence, the knowledge that behind the shrine there is a story, and behind the story there is another story, and behind that one another, all the way back to the serpent, and the sword, and the age before the sword had a name. The egg cracked. The world began. The stories are still here. Part 12. What remains? There is a kind of story that does not end when the story ends. Not because the events continue. The events stop. The people die. The battles are over. The swords are placed in shrines, and the tombs are sealed, and the birds have flown to wherever birds fly, when they are carrying what birds carry, in the Kojiki's understanding. But the meaning continues. The relevance continues. The question the story was asking continues to be asked. The Kojiki's question is something like this: what is the relationship between the human and the divine? How does a person receive what the gods are trying to give? How does an emperor establish the right to rule? How does a son do what his father asks, when what his father asks is too much? How does a woman make the crossing when the crossing needs to be made? These questions are not answered in any final way. The Kojiki does not answer them. It tells stories that illuminate them. It puts people in situations where the questions become urgent, and then shows what those people did and what happened to them. But it does not say, here is the answer. Here is how to receive the divine. Here is how to be a good emperor. Here is how to face the end with grace. It shows and then moves on. It trusts the reader with the work of understanding. This is one of the reasons the Kojiki has been studied for 1,300 years, not because it answers things, because it shows things clearly enough that you can keep looking at them and keep finding new angles. Yamato Takeru, he is still being studied, still being staged, still being turned into films and manga and novels and plays and all the forms that stories take when they are alive enough to keep being told. Why? Not because he was triumphant. He was not triumphant. He died in the middle of things. Not because he was good. He killed his brother. He called the sea small. He left the sword because he was true. True in the sense of being recognizable. True in the sense of being the kind of person who actually exists, who is too much for their circumstances, who is too strong for their family, who loves with the full force of everything they are and loses what they love and keeps going anyway until they cannot go anymore. We know this person. We have been this person. We have loved this person. We have watched this person from a distance and felt the particular combination of admiration and grief that the Kojiki's telling of him produces. The white bird is for all of them. Jingu Kogo, she is still studied, still debated, whether she was historical, whether the campaign happened, whether the stones were literal or metaphorical, but the image is clear: a pregnant woman binding cold stones to her body and leading a fleet across the sea because her dead husband's campaign needed completing, and she was the one who was there. The question she poses is simpler than the questions about her historicity. The question she poses is, what do you do when the person who was supposed to do it is gone? And her answer, the answer the Kojiki gives in her name, is that you do it yourself. You prepare properly. You ask for help from the right sources. You make the crossing. This is not presented as extraordinary in the Kojiki. It is presented as what happened. This is what she did. This is how it went. But the fact that it happened does not make it ordinary. It makes it the record of an actual thing that an actual person did when the situation required it. The sword is still in Atsuta. This seems like the right place to rest with the sword, the thing that connects the serpent in the river of Izumo to the shrine in the city of Nagoya, to the word for the eastern part of Japan, to the woman who went into the sea, to everything that followed. The sword is in the dark. It is not shown. It has not been shown for longer than most things last, but it is known to be there, and the knowledge of its presence is part of what the shrine means, part of what the city means, part of what it means to be in the place where these things happened. Certain things are more powerful in the dark. Certain truths are more true when they are held rather than displayed. The Kojiki understood this. The shrine understands this. The dark maintains it. The egg cracked. This is still the beginning that the Kojiki goes back to again and again the before the before, the state of the universe, before it chose to be a universe with Japan in it. The egg cracked, the sky rose, the earth sank. The first gods came into being, they built the world. The world became Japan. Japan became the emperors. The emperors became the present became us. All of it is in the Kojiki, all of it connected. The serpent and the sword and the princess and the woman in the sea and the white bird and the shrine in the dark city and the god at the corner of the street. Let it rest now. The stories have been told. The connections have been named. The web has been shown. From one angle, there are other angles. There are always other angles. The Kojiki is deep enough that you can approach it from any direction and find something you had not found before. But for now, for this particular telling, for this version of the long, quiet story that runs from the first stirring in the universe to the shrine on the corner of your street, let it rest. The world was made. The heroes came. The songs were sung. The birds flew where they needed to go. And you are here, in the long continuity of it, somewhere in the chain that runs from the egg to the present, carrying in you whatever you carry, doing whatever it is you are here to do. The world was made by things that happened before you. The shrine at the corner of your street was placed there by decisions made before you were born. The name of the place you live in was given by someone who stood in that place and felt something and said a word. You are in the middle of all of that, not at the beginning, not at the end, in the long middle, the part of the story that is not yet written, the part that is still being lived. This is what the Kojiki was written for, not just to preserve the past, but to give the people of the present a sense of the depth behind them, the sense that the place they were standing had been stood in before by people whose names could be traced back through the generations, all the way to the gods. You have that depth behind you. Every human being has that depth behind them. The particular depth varies. The particular stories vary, but the depth is real. The chain is real. The world that was made before you arrived in it is real. Rest. Part 13. The Road East. The Eastern Road is long, not long in the way that any road is long when you measure it in distance, long in the way that matters more, which is in what happens on it, in what the road asks of the person walking it, in the accumulation of things that are given and taken over the course of the going. Yamato Takeru left Issei with the sword and the bag and the warning. He went east. The eastern road in the Kojiki's time was not the road we know now. There was no great highway. There were paths, older paths, paths that followed the coast and went through the mountain passes and crossed the rivers at the places where rivers could be crossed. He was not an army. He was one person, the same person who had gone to Kumaso alone, the same person who had found Izumo Takeru alone. This is part of the quality of Yamato Takeru that the Kojiki insists on. He went alone, or nearly alone, without the armies that an emperor's campaign would normally require, without the infrastructure of conquest, just the sword and the bag, and the force that could not be contained by any ordinary circumstances. He passed through Totoumi, the province of the distant sea, the province where the coast bends westward and the mountains come down close to the water, and the road runs between rock and sea with no room for error. He passed through it, the way he passed through everything, moving forward, dealing with what needed to be dealt with, leaving the things that had been difficult behind him and moving toward the things that would be difficult next. He passed through Totoumi and into Suruga, and it was in Suruga that the fire happened, the field, the dry grass, the man who invited him in, the fire from all sides. The Kojiki describes this moment with the same directness it uses for everything. He was surrounded. He used the sword. He used the fire. He was not burned. But the moment carries more than its events. The moment says something about what it means to face a situation that was designed to kill you. A situation where the person who invited you in intended your death and had prepared for it carefully and had the advantage of knowing what they had planned, and you did not. The bag. Yamato Hime had said, "When things are most dangerous, open the bag." This was most dangerous. He opened the bag. Inside was fire, the fire striking stones, the possibility of his own fire, his own direction, his own counter to what had been set against him. The bag was the wisdom of the ant, the knowledge of the keeper of the shrine, the understanding that certain things that seem simple carry within them the possibility of surviving, the worst that can happen. He survived because she had prepared him. He survived because she had given him what he needed. For a moment she could not have described specifically, but could feel the shape of the way certain people can feel the shape of what is coming without knowing its details. From Suruga, he moved to Sagami. We have already been here. We have already watched the fire and the sea and Ototachibana Hime stepping out of the boat. But consider the sequence of it. He survived the fire. Then he faced the sea. Two elements, two of the most powerful things in the natural world, fire and water. Fire, he met with fire. The bag gave him that. Water, he met with loss. there was no bag for that. There was no counterfire for that. What the sea required was not his strength, or his weapons, or the things his aunt had given him. What the sea required was someone else's willingness to go into it. He could not make that offering himself. The sea demanded something he could not give, and Ototachibana Hime gave it. The fire was conquered by force. The sea was pacified by love, or by something that operates the way love operates when it reaches its fullest expression, which is the willingness to become the thing that the other person needs. From Sagami he went north into the mountains of Kai, through the mountain passes where the air is thin and cold, even in summer, through the forests where the trees are very old and the paths between them are darker than the paths of the lowland. He made a poem at Kai. He said something about the mountain, and about Narukami, the rolling thunder, and about the way the night sounds when you are in the mountains, and the thunder moves through the peaks, and the sound of it is not the flat single crack of thunder over open plains, but something more complex, more enveloping, rolling from one side to the other and back again. He was paying attention, even in the campaign, even in the middle of the going, from one thing to the next. He was listening to the thunder in the mountains and putting it into words. This is the other side of him, the side that made the first poem and the last poems and the poems in between, the side that was always listening to the world around him and finding words for what it sounded like. He went into Shinano, the mountain province, the province that is now called Nagano, the long field, but was then called Shinano, the land of the silkworm. The mountains of Shinano are among the highest in the central island. The passes through them are real passes, high and cold, where the snow can come, even in seasons that are not winter, and the wind is always the wind from somewhere colder than where you are. He crossed them. He went through the pass at the top of the mountain and looked down at the land on the other side, and the land was still Japan, still the islands, still the country his ancestors had made by stirring the sea with the jeweled spear, but it was a part of it he had not seen before, a part of it that was new to him, the east beyond the mountains, opening out, the great plain that would become the most populous part of Japan in every century that followed. He came down from the mountains. He continued east. He went through Mino and into Owari, and in Owari he found Miyazuhime, and he stayed. The rest that came before the last mistake. This is how the Kojiki structures it. The long campaign, the fire and the sea, and the mountains, and the gods subduing, and the people persuading, and then a rest, a house in Owari, a woman who was waiting, food and warmth and stillness, And then the word about the mountain, and the decision to go, and the sword left on the wall. The rest makes the mistake worse. If he had gone directly from the campaign to the mountain, if there had been no pause, no warmth, no woman who was glad to see him, no normalcy to slip back into, the mistake might be more forgivable. But the pause happened. The normalcy happened. He settled briefly into something like the ordinary life that other people lived, and then he left it to go to the mountain without the sword. The pride that had always been there found its moment in the pause. It said, "You survived everything. You survived the fire and the sea and the mountains. You are still here. You do not need the sword." And that was the last time the pride was right about anything. The cold came down from Ibuki. The god of the mountain did not need to fight him the way the people of Kumaso had fought him, or the way Izumo Takeru had needed to be tricked. The god of the mountain simply let him come up without the sword, and then let the cold do what cold does to a person who no longer has. What was protecting them? This is the mountain god's patience. The mountain does not fight back. The mountain simply is what it is. It is cold at the top. It has always been cold at the top. Anyone who goes up without preparation will feel the cold when that person is already weakened by the pride that makes them think. They do not need preparation. The cold does the rest. Yamato Takeru came down from the mountain, changed, not in the way that people come down, from difficult experiences, having learned something in the way that people come down, from experiences that have taken something that cannot be restored. He came down, he found the spring, he drank, he steadied himself, he walked with a staff, he made his way toward home, and at Nobono on the coast, with the sea visible, and Yamato somewhere behind the mountains, to the west, he ran out of going. The poems at the end, there are 3 of them. The Kojiki gives him 3 poems at the end of his life. The first is the poem about Yamato. Oh Yamato, the folded mountains, the most beautiful place. The second is a poem about his sword, the sword he left with Miyazu Hime. He says, "Oh my sword, you are leaning on the brushwood. You are left alone. Oh my sword." He is thinking about the sword in the last hours of his life, with the folded mountains of home in his mind. He is also thinking about the sword, the thing he left, the thing he should not have left, the thing that is somewhere in Owari, leaning against a wall, while he is here dying without it. Not regret exactly, something more like the simple acknowledgement of the specific shape of what happened. The sword is there, he is here, the distance between them is what it is. The third poem is about a crane. He says, "I would rather be a crane. I would rather have the crane's long life." He knew. He understood what was happening. He was dying, and he knew it, and he said, "I would rather be the bird. I would rather have the long life." And then he died, and the bird rose. Perhaps the crane is both things, the longing for the long life, and the long life itself, the wish and its fulfillment, the thing you wanted, given to you at last, in the form that was left to give it in. He is still flying. This is the way to understand. The white bird at the end, not as a consolation, not as the Kojiki saying, "Don't worry, he is fine," as the truth of what happened, the soul that was too large for the body it was in, finding a form that could hold its size. The white bird, large and luminous, flying south, flying toward Yamato, flying toward the folded mountains, going home. This is part 2 of the Kojiki, the age of the heroes, the age when the line from the gods was still close enough to the surface that a person could contain the force of it in ways that were extraordinary and devastating and beautiful. The age before the line was diluted to the point where the emperors lived and ruled and died in the ordinary way of human things. The age of Yamato Takeru, the age of Jingu Kogo, the age when the world was still close enough to its divine origins that the divine could come through a person in ways that changed everything. Part 3 will take us further into the centuries that followed, into the stories that accumulated as the line moved forward through time, into the age when the gods were further from the surface, when the emperors were more human than divine, when the stories shifted from the extraordinary to the complicated, from heroes who were too strong for the world to people who were simply trying to navigate the world they were in, but the thread still runs. The line from Amaterasu to the living emperor, the line from the sword in the serpent's tail to the sword in the dark shrine, the line from the first poem that Susanoo made in Izumo about the many-fenced palace, to every poem that has been made in Japanese in the 13 centuries since. The thread still runs, and you are somewhere on it, living in the world that was made by these events, breathing the air of the islands that were born from the salt dripping off a jeweled spear. The world is old, the stories are older, you are somewhere in the long middle of something that started before anyone was keeping track and will continue after the keeping track stops. But for now, the white bird is enough. The white bird is always enough. Part 14, The Long Night. The night is long, in the old Japanese understanding, not because the hours are different. The hours are what they are. The night in Japan is no longer than any other night at the same latitude, but in the old stories, in the songs of the Manyoshu, and in the poems of the Kojiki, and in the understanding that runs beneath both, the night has a quality of waiting, of the things that happen in the dark, that do not happen in the light, of the space between one day and the next, where the gods walk, and the dead are present, and the world is more fully what it is than it can be in the ordinary light. Yamato Takeru made his poems at night, not all of them, but the ones at the end, the ones at Nobono, with the folded mountains to the west, and the sea to the south, and the darkness around him, and whatever light there was, coming from the stars. The night was the time for saying what could not be said in the ordinary way, the time for the poem that came out of the person before the person had decided to say it. This is the tradition that the Kojiki is part of, the tradition of the night poem, the waka, the short poem of 31 syllables that the Japanese had been making since before the Kojiki was written, and have been making ever since. The Kojiki is full of poems. Every important moment in the age of the gods and the age of the heroes is marked by a poem. The first poem was Susanoo's poem about the many-fenced palace, love poem written in Izumo after the serpent was dead and the sword was in Amaterasu's hands, and Kushinada Hime had been returned from her comb shape. The many fences of love, the poem that came out of the destruction and found something worth building in the rubble. And the last poems in Yamato Takeru's story are the poems about home, about the folded mountains, about the sword leaning in the brushwood, about the wish to be a bird. Between the first poem and the last ones, there is the whole middle of the story, the serpent and the sword and the fire and the sea, the years of campaign, the things given and taken, and the poems mark the beginning and the ending of the most important arcs. The Manyoshu has 130 poems about the seventh night, about Tanabata, about Orihime and Hikoboshi waiting on either side of the river of heaven. 130 poems about one night, about waiting, about the one night in the year when the waiting ends and the river can be crossed. This is the tradition Yamato Takeru is part of, the tradition that takes the most painful and the most beautiful things and makes them into the small shaped forms that can be carried. A poem is a thing you can carry. 31 syllables. The weight of that is nothing. You can put it in your memory and take it with you everywhere. And what it carries inside it is the whole weight of the moment it was made in. The weight of the folded mountains, the weight of the sword left behind, the weight of the wish for the long life, all of that in 31 syllables, light enough to carry, heavy enough to hold, everything it needs to hold. Rest now. The night is long. The stories are told. The swords are in their shrines. The birds are where they need to be. The folded mountains of Yamato are still there, blue-gray in the evening, the way mountains look when the light is leaving and they are settling into the particular patience of things that have been there for longer than memory and will be there long after everything that happened today has joined the long archive of things that happened. You are somewhere in that, in the long story, in the middle of it. The egg cracked. The world began. The white bird flew. Sleep